and welcome back to another episode of Conversations, the show where we have a conversation about some of the things that maybe if more of us were having conversations about them, our lives might look a little bit different. And so for all of you who are joining us live, please get in the chat. Let us know that you're here. Say hello. And this is a very cool topic that we're talking about today because we're talking about your life, your terms. And while that seems like maybe simple, I don't think that there are very many people who are living life on their terms because we haven't really had the space or the conversations to explore what are our terms. And are those our terms, or are they terms that have been imposed on us by other people as good terms to have? And we're going to talk about all of these types of things today in this conversation. And as always, I'm not having a conversation with myself, although my multiple personalities could probably handle it, but it would be better, in my opinion. It's always better to have a conversation with another human because this is where we get opportunities to challenge our own perspectives and learn new things. So I get to learn new things every week as well. And this is the point. We can all continue to learn and grow together. And this week we're learning and growing together with Cheryl Luther, who does a lot of work in the arena of figuring out your terms and creating a map that can help you get there. But before we learn too much, before I spoil all the fun, let's learn a little bit more about what Cheryl thinks. Cheryl, can you tell us a little bit more about you and why living life on your terms is something that's so important to you?
For sure. Hello, everybody out there in internet world. My name is Cheryl Luther. I have a pretty interesting background, and it ranges from small business to corporate to pro football. I've done a lot of different things, but at the end of the day, what is really true to my heart is being authentic and showing up in a space where you feel like you can contribute. And I think that we'll get into this conversation, I'm sure, today. But I feel like where a lot of us are conditioned to feel like we must do something, and it may not exactly fit with what makes us thrive, but we must we check all the boxes. We have to fit in the little box to make everybody else happy. And at the end of the day, we aren't happy. We think we are happy because we've checked the box, but we're really not living our best life. And I think that if we could, as humans, as a human group, and as individuals, if we could all live life where we're thriving, I think we could elevate humanity. I think we could elevate our families. I think we could elevate our wealth and our contribution. And I think that is, I think that piece of living authentic is really important to being able to get us there. And instead of feeling so low and gray and just making it work. Mm-hmm. So that's what I do. I love helping people thrive in their own skin and thrive in their own sphere and helping their families thrive and make it a legacy thing. So that's what I love doing. So I'm glad that we're having this conversation.
Awesome. And for those of you who know me, you probably can figure out why Cheryl and I vibe this whole concept of the authenticity and living your life authentically. So the word authentic will probably come up a whole bunch of times in this conversation. And that's great. And well, maybe let's start off by framing authenticity, because I always feel like I feel like it's become somewhat of an empty word, especially in the digital environment, because people are like, just be authentic. And the problem is that there's no one way that authenticity
be authentic like everybody else.
Right. Yeah. And so like one of the things you mentioned in your intro, Cheryl, was this like checking the box thing, right? And I think that authenticity has kind of come into that. I'll just check the box and say like, well, that was authentic. But for me, in my journey, and I'd love to hear from your journey, is like, I didn't always have a like deep insight into what was authentic for me. Mm-hmm. Like I went to business school. Business school taught me how to be a business person, right? And quite honestly, there's not a huge focus on authenticity in climbing the corporate ladder. Mm-hmm. And so while by nature, I am an authentic person, and things that I realized in my journey were like, they felt like, now I call it chiseling away at my personal brand, these
Mhm.
things that like I wouldn't do. I wouldn't do that. And so for me, authenticity always comes back to like doing what you would do, saying what you would say because you want to do or say it.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that's it. So I'd love to hear Cheryl, because again, I think this is one of the things where everybody kind of has their own definition. So like, what is authenticity to you?
That's a great question and a complicated one. I don't know that we could actually get to it in the small amount of time that we have, but I'll try to truncate it a little bit. I think authenticity is really just showing up who you are deep in your soul. And I think that it comes back to I mean, you just look at me and you can say, she's not like a normal woman. No, I'm gay. I'm married to a woman. I don't fit in that normal box. And I think part of that comes into when I think of authenticity. Like, yes, I'm in a woman's body, but I'm attracted to a woman. So for me, that's authentic. For me, that's different than the box that says that I should be authentic in a different way. So what my interests are. I love to fish. Most women don't love to fish, right? It's usually like I love my horses, I love my pigeons, I love football. I love a lot of things that make me a little weird in like the overall picture. Uh but it makes as I embrace it, it makes me feel so whole. And I think that wholeness is what really authenticity is, and feeling like your heart is thriving and that you're okay in your own skin. And as you, as me, as anybody starts to step into and lean into their authenticity, I think other people can respect that and can maybe step back and try to not say you should be doing this and this. Instead, they should be clapping and helping other people thrive in what is authentic to them. And I think that confidence comes through, and people are gravitated toward that confidence.
Absolutely.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I just want to share, because of all of the pieces of you that you shared, the thing that was like, so like I hate birds. So you're like, I love pigeons. I'm like, ooh, I just like, ooh. But this is the whole point about like being authentic. It's not about me, right? Like literally, I had a couple of really bad experiences with birds that have like tainted all birds, which is unfair for all birds, but I don't know that if they have feelings. Sorry, birds. I'm sure your pigeons. I don't know. Anyway, this is not where the conversation is going. But the point is that like there's no reason. I want to talk about the shoulds thing for a minute, right? Because where does a should even come from? Most of the time it comes from outside of you, right?
Yeah, usually like parents, grandparents, generational, institution, the government, like these things that say you must go this way.
Right. And then like this is the thing. I'm like my husband loves football. Maybe I should love football because then we'd have more things in common, right? I don't love football. I don't hate football. I'm just mostly indifferent to football, right? Like, and it's, but one of the things that I think could be really powerful is for us, even as humans, because I don't think we're all going to go through our lives and think like, oh, I wonder why someone else thinks that. I use this example on the show a lot. Like, sometimes, how can someone believe the earth is flat? I wonder. And there are people who are, and I don't think poorly of them. I don't think the same as them, right? So I wonder. And do we hang out? No, we don't hang out. But like when there's this thought that you have for yourself, that's then like, well, they should believe the earth is round, right? But and then this is the type of thing that happens, right? Like this happened a lot for my younger sister, right? Like she's the little sister, just irresponsible, right? Leaves her keys on the roof of her car and all the things. But like, there's so many times where we've like created this, like, you should be more responsible. You should be more responsible. And in those moments, all people see are the times where they haven't been responsible, right? But all of us have times where we have been responsible, right? And so I think that shoulds are always calling to attention. Like, I'm trying to think of a scenario where it's not doing this, but like a deficit, right? It's calling to attention a deficit that says you should be more this, or you should be less. You should be not as loud. You should be not as bossy. You shouldn't like fishing. You shouldn't like. I saw this like post that like broke my heart from this gentleman who just really likes wearing high heel shoes, and I'm like, so you should wear them. Like if you like it. I actually hate wearing high heels.
I couldn't imagine, but
yeah, like
why anybody is my opinion, like why on this little stick, and like why? It hurts.
It makes me think of this.
It makes you feel sexy, go for it.
There's this movie, I'm trying to remember the name of it now. It's like one of those really ridiculous teen movies, and there's like these three guys that dress up as girls to get into a sorority for whatever reason. But like the one guy's always wearing heels, and the other guys are like, why are you wearing those? Those are the worst. And he's like, dude, they make my legs look thinner. Like, okay, sure. You do you, right? But the point is that like, why do we as people, let's put this out there. This is pretty philosophical, Cheryl, but like, why do we as people think that we should even have an opinion about how someone wants to live their life?
That's a hard question. And I think that for me, how I like to approach it is that I can have an opinion for myself. And although I may have an opinion about somebody else, that's my business. And I don't need to, I don't need to project that on them, because that's authentic for them. And that's not authentic for me, but it's authentic for them. And if I'm going to respect that boundary, there's no need for me to go and say, you shouldn't be doing that, unless they're hurting somebody. And then I draw, the line just like disappears. But for the most part, I think it's you be you. And if that makes sense to you, I feel like it's not of us to judge other people in that manner, what is authentic to them, unless there's like death or something's being manipulated in a very poor manner where somebody's going to get hurt. But
I know I always say I don't know why I always feel like I have to frame that in being like, don't murder people. Okay. Like I don't want anybody to be like, I saw Tracy's show and she gave us permission to do you, and I want to murder people. No, there are lines. Okay,
there are lines. Yes.
Do you, like most of us doing us, right? Like being ourselves doesn't impact anybody in any kind of significant way, right? Like what kind of food you like to eat, what kind of sports you like to watch, what kind of activities you like to do, what kind of people you want to hang out with, right? Like most of these things don't impact other people. Mm-mm. And especially if they're not impacting people in a negative way, then hey, that's why I have the whole permission to do you thing, right? Like do it. I think you should. But yeah, if you use your judgment, if you're hurting other people, then maybe think about it.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. And when we get into this conversation, I know there's somebody on the line. They're like, well, you're drinking out of a plastic bottle and that has PCBs. And then that is, you have to go to oil fields to be able to produce that. And you're hurting somebody by drinking that water. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, people although I also live in Alberta, and Alberta runs on oil and gas. So I'm also employing somebody, which I've never actually thought about before. But human philosophical things. The whole point is, I remember this. I remember being on the bus to school once, and there was this guy in the back corner just super loud, right? Like so loud in his conversation that really no one else could have a conversation. And I'm just sitting there and I'm thinking like, wow, that guy's really loud. But there was never a moment where I was like, he should be quiet. Why should he be quiet? He's like excited about what he's talking about. That's kind of good. I don't have anybody I'm sitting next to that I want to talk to. So like, that's kind of lucky that he has somebody he wants to talk to, right? Like, I think there's just like this almost societally accepted, like we should judge people. Another should, right? Like that's just what humans do. We judge people. Well, a lot of us have a lot of practice in judging people. So that being judged.
Yeah, you might have skill in it, but it's not an innate human thing, right? Like we don't have to and it's funny because I was sharing this a couple of weeks ago on another show that I was on, and I was at a birthday party for a 1-year-old, right? So there's lots of moms there, right? And I go into the room and immediately start comparing what size I am to other people. My own internal monologue being, I should be smaller, right? Like, and that's a societal narrative, right? It's not something I believe, but it was just a really interesting thing to observe about myself, because I was like, wow, I'm not actually thinking that those people should be smaller or bigger. I'm thinking that I should be smaller. And because society says that, like, you have to get back to your pre-baby weight once you have a baby, and we're going to give you all of these tools and strategies to do that. And you're like, well, but I remember saying this once, like, if I wanted to go back to my like 6-year-old body, I can't do that, right? Like, I can't get shorter. I can't get less. I mean, I could get less muscle mass, but I don't really want to, right? Like, I can't actually do that. It's not physically possible. And there's all of these narratives that are like sneakily hiding under the surface that are things we don't actually believe. And so, Cheryl, I'd love to know how those types of, like, I'm going to call them programmed narratives, right? They came from society or your culture or your parents. They're like programmed into you, but they're things you don't actually believe, and how those types of things impact your ability to live life on your terms.
Yeah, that's a huge hurdle. And some people don't accomplish that hurdle even in an entire lifespan. I think that for people who can recognize that they have been programmed and that they may or may not believe those programs, I think that's the very first step, like the awareness of that this is a thing. And then from there, I think it's really deciding, do I want to believe that? Does that resonate with me? Does it not resonate with me? And that will give you a direction of where you want to go. If this resonates me, cool, just keep on the path. That this is good for me. This is what I consider authentic. I'm happy here. This is safe. This is good. This is what I want. Cool. Do you? Other people are like, I'm not sure. Is this really me? Do I believe this? Does this make sense to me? What if? For those people, I think it's really important to read books, to engage with other people, ask questions, have conversations.
Well, we agree on that.
Yes.
And this is the thing about, and this is the power I think comes in conversations, right? Because even before this, like Cheryl and I, we've had multiple conversations. I never knew the pigeon thing, right? That just came up today. And not that the pigeon thing is specific, it's specifically resonating for me, which is why I'll keep bringing it up. But the point is that, like,
you're traumatized by just the word.
I'll explain to you my story later offline. If anybody else wants to know it, it's trauma. It's trauma for me. But like, there's new things that you can learn in any given conversation with a person. And this is why I think it's so powerful to just open up spaces for conversation. Mm-hmm. And even coming into this conversation, Cheryl's like, well, is there a specific place we're trying to go with this conversation today? And I'm like, we'll go where we go. That's the point, right? And for those of you who are new to the show or don't know this about the show, we have a conversation and we never really know where it's going to go. But that's also part of the discovery, right? Mm-hmm. And part of like listening to what each other has to say and then saying like, oh yeah, that makes sense to me, or that doesn't make sense to me. And not saying like, that's wrong because that doesn't make sense to me, but like, oh, that's a different perspective I have never had before, because every human has a different perspective than you. And when we can listen to those things, and I like to say, try it on for ourselves, right? So it's not about listening to a thing and being like, Tracy thinks this, and therefore I think that, right? Like, no. If I think that and I say that, because I'm overly opinionated and I usually say what I think, and you hear that and you're like, yeah, that feels true to me, then cool, right? Like you can own it and also like try on other things, right? I've actually been coached live on this show, which is one of my favorite things when people are like, can I challenge you on that? And I'd be like, yes, please do, because now I can learn more things. This is what conversations can give to you. And when you're looking at this transition of, if you're in this space right now where you're saying like, I don't know that I'm living life on my terms. I feel like this is like societal terms, or maybe even I'm kind of just drifting around without like having any kind of direction or terms that I'm aligned with. And you want to look at like, what could it look like to live life on my terms? This is a great place to just start asking questions.
Ask questions, talk to people. They say that you're most similar to the 5 people that you spend the most time with. So my suggestion is, if you're questioning what if, or maybe, or like just not sure, meet a new friend. Just be around them. See if they like pigeons. See if they like to fish. See what they like to do, and then ask yourself, well, is that true? Is that true for me? What, ask a few questions, or just observe and just ask yourself, can this be true for me? Do I want it to be true for me? Or think, I really want that. I really want, I know what I want, but there's a gap here from where I am and to where I want to be. Okay, so find somebody who's a little closer to that and spend some time with them.
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to pop this up from Andrew, because Andrew and I have legit hung out 3 times this week. You're in my top 5 this week, Andrew. But one of the interesting things I think you bring up there too, Cheryl, is that there's things that we know about ourselves, that we own about ourselves, that we feel like we're able to give ourselves permission to do, right? Like, you like birds, you don't like birds, right?
Sure.
Most people will be like, cool. Right? Like, do you? I like tigers. Right? There are those things that are true about ourselves that we actually have practice accepting and standing for. Right? I hosted a networking event yesterday, and I do these funny intro questions. And the intro question was, if there was a room in your house that you could renovate to most reflect you, what room would it be? And somebody had chosen the kitchen, and then we were talking about like gas ranges versus electric ranges and all these things. And there was a gentleman that came in, and he was like, but men don't care about what kind of stove we have, do we, guys? and one of the other guys was like,
I think I do.
I really care. And I was like, my husband is the one who picked our stove. Yeah. He's the one who does the cooking. But it was just like, it was interesting to see, because people were like not afraid to stand up for that, right? Like, no, I am a man and I want a gas range, right? And again, to me, this is one of the things like, cool for you. And like, it doesn't impact my life at all if you have a gas range or an electric range. But it was just so interesting. Like, people have those things. They're like, yeah, I'm totally willing to stand up that I don't agree with you on that. And that we can like still have a fun networking event and move forward from that. But when it comes down to like more of those like purposeful life things, I think there's a different level of ownership there, which now that I think about it is kind of like backwards. Like, you think the more value driven it is, the more like committed you would be to it. But I think we also get so much external narrative on what we should believe, on what we should do, versus like what you should watch on TV, right? Like, there's less narrative about that. So if there's a difference, people don't really care.
I think those more core ideas, I think that we've had so many. Most people have bowled before, and they put, for the kids, they put little bumpers down the aisle so you don't lose your ball. So I think it's kind of like that for emotions and for our core values and for what we are supposed to believe. Like, we may think one way, but those bumpers continue to keep us kind of in this path. And if we deviate from that, we are chastised, or we're punished, or there's an emotional hurt that goes along with that. So we want to stay within the bumpers. And that, I think, pulls away from that authenticity that we were talking about earlier. And I think that pulls away from that willingness to stand up. Like talking about a gas stove versus an electric stove, it's pretty benign. But when you get into something like gay marriage or abortion or religious beliefs or deeper emotional stuff, I think people have run into those bumpers so often that they're afraid to speak out because they don't want that negative connotation that comes with it. They don't want that hurt that comes with it. They don't want to be the brave one that stands up and says, this is what I believe, and then take all the arrows.
Right. And it's interesting too, because I feel like this similar challenge with just even being authentic, right? I hear this all the time because I help a lot of people with their digital, like being authentic in the digital world. And there's so many people who are like, well, like I can't show that side of me on LinkedIn. And my whole thing is like, why not? and that authenticity is about you deciding, right? Yeah. Like if you don't want to talk about pigeons, then that's fine, right? Like you don't have to. But it's when it's dictated by someone else that you can't do it because that is bad or wrong or what have you, then there's a level of external pressure that's being placed on your authenticity. Mm-hmm. And we can choose to accept that, or we can say, I mean, this is with my narrative, right? Like I get one life and maybe I get more, but I'm pretty sure you won't remember it anyway. So like, I'm going to remember one.
I don't know.
I don't know what like, who knows? But anyway, in my experience, I get one life. So do I want my one life to be me doing what everybody else thinks I should when I know that that's not what I would do? Or do I just go and do what I want? And it is riskier, right? I want to talk about this concept of risk because
definitely,
like I have a pretty traditional family that I grew up in, right? Mom, dad goes to work and makes the money. Mom stays home, takes care of the kids, does the cooking and all of those things. I have me and two sisters, right? So like all girls. And while we lived in this narrative, verbal narrative that you can do and be anything you want, what we lived was that this is the woman's role, right? And so like I got married and I did that and I hated it the whole time. And I was like, this doesn't feel like me, right? Like, and I was dusting these, I've talked about this a lot, right? I was dusting these shelves and I was like, I think I'm being my authentic self like 5% of the time. Right? And as soon as I thought that, I was like, what is up with that? Like, I actually think I'm pretty good, right? Like, I didn't like, I'm pretty smart. I'm pretty fun, right? Like I'm athletic. I like things. I'm nice to people, right? Like, why would I not be myself? And it was because of my five, right? Like those five people around me who had this really strict idea of who I was. And I was trying to be that for them, but it wasn't me at all. And they had decided I was going to be that. And I was like, well, I could stay doing that. I could be that for them, but then I'm going to continue to be 5% of my authentic self. You. And I think the world loses by me not being my authentic me. So I got divorced and I like changed my job and I like all the things. I have a very different relationship with my parents now, right? Like this is my life. And if you can't respect and support what I know is right for me, that's okay. Right. And I love you. And that's okay. I have to do me. And 5 years from now, that might look different, but I have to sure. do what feels like I'm expressing myself. And it's been like a pretty drastic transformation and not without fear, for sure.
Well, I'm sure. So I think some people, maybe, I don't know of your core listeners, but maybe other people who have not seen you before, how did you get to the point where you're able to make the decision to break out of your shell? I
I
think a lot of
always,
people get stuck in
yeah.
like that comfort zone of, oh my goodness, am I going to lose my family? Is my dad not going to support my decision? My dad doesn't support my decision. He just told me. But you know what? That's okay because I'm not him. But how some people don't have the confidence or the support or the just gusto to push through that shell and make the decision to make a choice, to make a different pathway for themselves. How did you get there?
It's funny because I always wish that there was a way to get there without the straw breaking the camel's back.
Mm.
But I think everyone that I've talked to that has gone on this type of journey just got to a place where somebody demanded too much of them that they were no longer willing to give. And and like for me, honestly, it was like it probably was a whole bunch of little things, but that's why they say the straw that broke the camel's back. Like straw, 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 straw for 10 years, all of a sudden one, and you're just like, no, just no. And it was like, so I had that realization, and then I had this conversation with my sister about it. And then like I went on a work trip, and it was like the biggest disaster of a work trip ever, right? We were hosting this big event in New York, and like the postcards had like spelling errors on them like the night before. So I'm like trying to like madly in like Microsoft Paint trying to make these like fixes on a laptop and hosting clients a dinner, right? Like, and it was like we missed our flights, and then like our hotel, like we didn't call the hotel, and then the hotel didn't have our rooms, and like seriously, every single thing went wrong with this thing. The event actually went pretty smoothly, the like 2-hour event in itself, but everything else, the entire trip was a disaster. And my ex like just wanted me to call to say goodnight every night, and I was like, dude, you have no idea what's going on right now, right? Like I can't think about that. I need to just be in this and fix this and make this happen. And so he got really mad at me. And then when I was coming home, he was out at a work dinner, and I was like, okay, I'm leaving at the airport. I'll meet you at home. I've been gone for like 5 days, right? And it's winter, like January, so cold in Calgary and icy. And I got back to the house, and the lights are off, and no one is home. And I was just like, nope. Like I mean more than that to myself, and so like I'm not going to accept that someone else, I don't mean that much to someone else, right? Like I'm done. And I left the next day, and never have regretted it. It has been the right decision for me. And I'm not saying that like getting divorced and everything is always the right decision either, but it's, to me it was literally like, will I accept being treated like this for the rest of my life? Because that's what I'm accepting, right? Will I accept that? And at that point, for whatever combination of reasons, my answer was no. And even still, like I didn't want to tell my grandma about it, right? And then it was Easter, and I was like, no, he's not coming. And then my grandma was like so concerned that he was mad at her, and that's why he wasn't coming. And I was like, no, I don't want him there. That's why he's not coming. And like the first time I had to say it, like I had never said it. And then as soon as I said it, there was like this ownership of like, yeah, I agree with that, right? Like I said it, I believe it. And he's not a bad person, right? Like I don't believe that like people are innately bad people. I believe that there are people who can support you in being you, and there's people who can't. And that since that moment, I was like, I'm going to be surrounded by people who make me the best version of me, who allow me to be like my shiniest self. Side note, I had my boss had once said to me, like, you know, you sparkle a little bit less when you're with him. And I was like, ugh, that sounds
That's
terrible.
not a good comment.
No, I don't want to sparkle less. I always want to sparkle as much as possible. And so like now I'm like, I'm gonna be surrounded by people who make me feel sparkly, right? And that's why I think my current marriage is so successful, because I was like, I won't accept anybody who's not going to make me extra sparkly. And if you can't handle my sparkle, then this is going to end at one date. And like, I want to share from the parental perspective a little bit too, because my experience owning that, it did feel like I might be breaking something with my parents, right? Like, this is the role they've created for me, and I don't accept that anymore. And I'm going to do what I know is right for me. And it was so weird. And again, this won't be everybody's experience, unfortunately, but it's like all of a sudden my dad respected me. And I was like, oh, if I'd have known that, I would have done that a long time ago.
Right.
Because you get these like, and there's so many like mindsets from the familial perspective that like get created for you when you're like 0 to 7, right? So then you're like, you think that how you behave is what earns you love, right? And now I know as a parent, literally there's nothing this kid could do that would make me love him less. If he was a murderer, I'd be super disappointed in him, but like, I actually can't imagine not loving him, right? There's like this love that you have for your offspring, and like, it is what it is. I won't encourage him to murder people, obviously, but like, I think he's going more the engineering route at this time. But it's, I don't know. Cheryl, I would love to say that there is like a formula that every person could follow that could like help you have that moment where you decide that you are worth it and you can change things to make your life more you. I have never seen two similar stories. I have seen people like I said, the straw that broke the camel's back scenario, that seems to be pretty common, right? Like, or hit rock bottom is another thing that people like to say. That is almost like you bounce off the bottom and have somewhere else to go.
It's your set point. It's when you get to that set point, or you've moved past that threshold, that you need to bounce back up. And I think when we talk about these things, there's a huge gamut of people out there. Some are highly motivated to do their own thing, you and I. Then there's people that are kind of middle of the road. They're like kind of sort of okay with everything. They're not really sure if they've hit that threshold yet. They're thinking it's comfortable enough. I'm going to just sit here for a minute and see what else happens. And then there's people who are stuck in awful relationships, awful situations where there's a lot of abuse, there's a lot of mind game, where they don't feel like they'll ever get to that point where they could get away from that. And I think so that recognizing that it's not just like one way, and it's not just how one way of living for everybody, that there's a huge gamut of people out there. And that's why we have so many tough stories of women who are abused their entire life. And that's generational. And then their kids only know that, and then they perpetuate it. So I think, again, it's coming in with people like you and I who are authentic and are willing to have these conversations, so we can expand the thought process of there's enough to go around, that we all get to be who we want to be. And it's okay to make new choices. We don't all have to make the same choices, and we don't all have to be stuck. We can progress ourselves. And that there's enough strength around the people that are maybe at the lower levels that are stuck. There's enough strength to be able to pull those people up and say that the boundaries are good. Putting solid boundaries and making good actions away or toward those boundaries will allow for more respect and more opportunities to open up. And I think as we talk about your story, particularly, like, you are super, super strong, but I know that there are some people out there that are they don't feel like they have that strength.
And this is why I really love that you brought up the 5 people, right? Because the 5 people feed you with 2 things. They feed you with a narrative, right? So words and stories, and they feed you with energy. Feed you with different types of energy. And it's funny now when I think about it, like, energy was never part of the conversation to me before I started my whole like transformation journey. And now I'm like, oh, there's people who like contribute to my energy, and there's people who drain my energy. And it doesn't, again, I don't believe that makes you good or bad person. I think that just means that, like, I like to be surrounded by people who push my energy up, who make me feel like who make me feel like CEO Tracy, right? Who believe more in me than I do, right? So that in those moments and we all have those moments, right? When you're just like, I'm the worst. I can't do anything. I can't help any clients, right? Like I can't get any calls, right? And you're like, I'm the worst. And like, it's so meaningful when you have those people around you that are like, okay, I see you having a moment, and your moment is valid, and it's a moment, and I'll see CEO Tracy tomorrow. Okay. Like they still believe that version of you is there, even though it's not there in the moment. And having those people, again, like there's a boundary. We brought up boundaries. There's an important boundary between like surrounding yourself with people who bring you up and having your existence be based on external validation. Right. So those are two different things. But when you have those people who believe in you, who see the real you, Andrew, I'm sure he'll put it in the chat at some point. He's always talking about feeling seen, heard, valued, and appreciated, right? Like when you have people around you that see you for who you are, and they hear they listen to what you have to say, and they appreciate you and value because you like pigeons, and not devalue you because you don't like pigeons, right? Like those are your people. So let's talk about this maybe for a minute, Cheryl. And in this journey of living life on your terms, how important in that journey, in that transition, is it for you to find your people?
Oh, I think it's tremendously important. I think that I think for those of us that want to have the conversations, I think it's really important to be able to have conversations with people who get you, maybe not 100%, because that's how you expand, right? But you have an opportunity to bounce ideas off of somebody that's not going to poo-poo everything that you say, and gives you an opportunity to say what if, and allows you to dream. So I think being around your people allows you to have like your goofy side come out, maybe your silly side come out, maybe your like insecure side come out, which is a part of you and it needs to be explored. And if you are always being shut down because you're not around the right people, I don't think that you're fully exploring who you are, so you can't fully be your authentic self. So I think finding your people is really, really crucial to understanding everything about yourself. Now, should you always stick with, your little bubble? We just talked about this. I don't think so. I think that you should expand your bubble, but I think finding your people to have a base, to have that ground level, that foundation is absolutely critical. Being in the queer community, I think it's really fun to be with other queer people because we have a similar experience. We get to understand society in this very unique way, and the conversations are very different than when I have with my straight friends or my parents, or the conversations are just a little bit different. The jokes are different. They're funnier, in my opinion, because we can be our goofy little selves. But I think, to answer your question, I think it's really crucial to find your people, but you have to know who you are to find your people. Like you have to go back in, find yourself, find your people, grow yourself so you can expand your people, right?
I always think that's like, I say that all the time, right? The fastest route to finding your people is to be yourself. Because if you're not being myself, I might end up with a whole bunch of, like in a bird club. Like I won't perform well in a bird club. This was just a really good difference that you brought up earlier between the two of us, Cheryl. And this is the thing, right? I really like what Kimberly is saying here about she likes to think of the types of people as sinks and radiators. One drains and the other warms and energizes you. That's a cool way to think about people. Yeah, this is why we have conversations, because you learn cool ways to to think about people. See, there's Andrew sharing, seen, heard, valued, and understood. Yeah, I knew I knew you would think it. And yes, this is about being yourself, but like we've talked about.
I have a question. If you're
Yep.
afraid of pigeons, birds, is it because of the wings? Because he said bee, and I'm wondering, are you afraid of insects because they have wings too?
It's bees are much smaller than birds.
Well, I have bees too.
Oh, I'm not afraid of bees. Actually,
good.
I would love to learn more about bees and
Yeah.
harvest my own honey. That sounds
Honey
very
is
interesting.
amazing. I need it.
But yeah, no, okay. I have an issue, a thing with the chicken from when I'm really small, and then I have this like seagull incident. So it's actually not pigeons. Pigeons have an unfair bird fear extrapolated onto them.
Got it.
It's not pigeons in particular. Andrew's not afraid of bees either. Good. Now we're learning about each other. This is fun. I'm not sure where I was going with this now, but there's. Oh, this is what I was going to say, and I say. So when I was young, I moved to Vancouver, and I didn't know anybody in Vancouver. And I just thought I could make friends like you make friends in school. But in school, you have a class together, or you have a club together, or you play basketball together. There's like a thing that you do. Mm-hmm. And when I was in Vancouver, I was like, oh no, there's no like thing that I do. There's work that I go to, but like I don't do things. And like my experience was that like everyone had already reached their quota of friends for life. And I was, not that they were mean to me, but they just didn't invite you in to like the club. So I was like, okay, well, I guess I gotta invite people somewhere because no one's inviting me anywhere. So I'd be the inviter. But one of those things that I learned in that scenario is that I don't believe that you can have too many friends, that you can have too many good people that you know. Now, is it true that you can only actively stay in contact with, I think it's like 150? Yes, like there's only so many, you can't have like thousands of best friends. It's not a thing, right?
And so when you have space for it.
Right. And so like you do have your like closest 5, but that doesn't mean that you can't have like cool conversations with people on LinkedIn Live, right? Or that you can't have like coffee chats or see somebody at a networking event. Or like, honestly, I did this once at like one day on my way to work in Vancouver. I'm like, I see these people every day. I see the same people every day. I'm going to say hello to them today. And half of them looked at me weird and half of them said hello back. And there was like do you know these people? You like go by them every day and then they're gone for like a couple of days and you're like, I hope they're fine. Like, hopefully they're just on vacation or something. But like, and this is part of who I am, right? Like, I notice that. I wonder that, right? Like, this is about embracing who you are. And we all have those moments, I think, where we do it. And so when we can tap into the fact that, okay, it's easy for me to say, like, I wear pink headphones. That's fun for me. It's part of my personal brand, right? And if someone doesn't like it, someone doesn't like it. But how can we tap into that as a human and say, like, okay, I do have some practice standing for what is a good version or what is I like the youest version, right? Like not the best version, but my meest version of me. And so how can I tap into that power and stand up for myself in the areas where it feels a little bit harder? So yeah, I think we could probably go in a whole bunch of different directions. Andrew asked me this question on his podcast earlier this week about having your cake and eat it too. Which is actually, we talked about this, a phrase that I think is really confusing. Why would you even have a cake if you're not allowed to eat it? It sounds like a terrible plan.
I don't know. But I don't have an answer.
Cheryl, I'd love for you because like this is really what you do. You help people figure out what are their terms. So if there was anything they could take away from today or any one challenge that you would give people that would allow them to move towards living life on their terms, what's one thing you would share with everyone?
One thing. I have multiple things, but except one thing. So I will give them a challenge, and later on I can I can give you the link if you want, but I have a life balance audit that they can go through and they can physically do an exercise. Sometimes people need to like use the kinesthetic part of their brain to do it. I'd be happy to give people that exercise. But if they just want to like kind of marinate and think about it, I would ask them to go through the different parts of their life, their intellectual life, their emotional life, their work life, their home life. Write as many pieces of their life down on a piece of paper and ask themselves, just put a plus or a minus. Are you living your full self in each one of those categories? And if you're not, if you give yourself a minus instead of a plus in one of those categories, ask yourself why. What's holding you back? What would it look like if you could give yourself a plus? And that's just a kind of a bare bones baseline. Where am I? Am I where I want to be? And if I'm not, okay, what does it look like if I were? And then we can start the conversation of, okay, let's figure out how to do it. Let's change some action steps, change some habits, figure out what small steps or large steps need to happen. And we can really make some awesome progress and getting people to thrive in their own skin, in their own way, in their own authenticity, and be happy. And I think that's, at the end of the day, we want happiness, we want freedom, and some of us want to leave a legacy. So I think that those pieces allow us to do that.
Oh, and I think I'm even going to do this exercise now because why not? It sounds fun. But I think too, it's like really interesting because you also start to learn like what is a plus for you, or what is like, is this like a big minus, or is it like a little minus, or like, how are you judging yourself in these categories? Because again, at the end of the day, one of the greatest regrets of the dying is that they didn't do more of what they wanted to do.
Yeah. And I think with this exercise, it's really, really, really critical to understand that this is not what your spouse thinks. This is not what your kids think, what your parents think, what your best friend thinks. This is what you think. This is like deep down inside. If you really look hard at yourself, what do you think? Because at the end of the day, you come into the world alone and you leave the world alone. Whether you're married or not, you're leaving the world alone. So you have to live this life, in my opinion, for you.
Yeah. Well, I agree with that. One last thing I would like to put, because there's an exercise like this and then there's action steps that come out of it. So is there an evolution that happens through those action steps as people learn more about themselves?
Oh, absolutely. I think that the cool thing about the steps and the exercises is that it can be repeated. And honestly, my wife and I, we go through a lot of these steps on a quarterly basis. We do it every 90 days because life changes, we change, we grow, we have different perspectives because we're human and our brains are plastic. We can change, we can move things around, we can think differently. Things become important or less important in our lives. And I think that using these tools again and again will give you a different and, in my opinion, better answer for the time, right? Because we're always growing, we're always changing. And so there is an evolution of where am I right now? Where do I see myself in the next little while? And where do I see myself in long term? And how am I going to get there? So it's always like, where am I right now? Am I where I want to be? No, okay, let's pivot. Am I where I want to be? No, let's pivot. All right, we're going to pivot again until we get to where we want to be. Yeah.
I still love it. I feel like you can't use the word pivot enough. It's great. I just want to call out a couple of things that are happening here in the chat before we wrap up. So Kimberly is saying about her sync and radiator people that she would schedule meetings with sync people before radiator people. It's funny because Kimberly, I actually do the opposite. I schedule meetings with radiator people before I have to do. Mostly syncs are things for me, aka accounting. So I schedule meetings with radiator people before I have to do my accounting because then I have all of the energy I need to do that. But this is a really interesting perspective of balancing that, right? So like you're not just having sinks and you're not just having radiators because sometimes the sink, if the sink overflows, then what happens then? And then Chris had a great question about what about those of us, oh, you guys are killing it. What about those of us empaths who are influenced by the sinks and the radiators? Are we sinks or radiators? I would, so Jim had a piece on that. Would that depend upon the immediate and long-term results? You guys are going nuts. Kimberly says, it's not actually up to us to answer that question about ourselves. Some people may see you as a sink and other will see you as a radiator. This is where I was going to go with this, Kimberly. And then Chris came back and said, I suppose I'm more concerned on our impact of those we lead. And I think this is a great, Chris, I think it would be a great one. Connect with Cheryl because she'll have more detailed questions for you, I'm sure. But who you are and how you perceive yourself is different than how other people perceive you. So there will be there's people who perceive me as a sink because I am too much and it drains their energy, right? There's some people who see me as a radiator and I ignite things for them. I can't actually control that. I can't control someone else's experience. But from the empath side, one of the challenges often for empaths is that they take on the ownership of those feelings of other people. So if you're with a sink, then you take on the feelings of sink and vice versa. And so I think it would be a cool exercise for you to look at, to take Cheryl's challenge and to separate those things and look at it just from yourself. Assuming right now it's just you, no sinks around, no radiators around, just you. And yeah, I'm a tornado. If you guys saw that on my LinkedIn, I'm a tornado. I identify as that. But as long as we're thinking about other people first, we're thinking about the people we lead first, or our kids first, or our spouse first, or whoever, then we're not actually in a practice of figuring out what's authentic for us. We're figuring out how we can best help other people. That's not the same activity. And so while there is an impact on you being authentic on other people, figuring out what is authentic and figuring out what your terms are is an individual activity. And then you can bring it to the table with multiple people. Is there anything else that you would add into all of those questions there, Cheryl?
There's a lot of questions.
Yeah.
I love that the chat is active. That's exciting. Yes, I agree with you, Tracy. I think that really the activity of understanding who you are that's a very individual event. I think being a great leader is another aspect of being authentic, but I don't think it creates that authenticity. I think you have to be whole in yourself, and then working with other people is a whole nother skill set. And I think that being a good leader allows you to encourage people to find their own authenticity so that they can step into it. You can, if they're looking for your guidance, you can kind of give them a general perspective of this is what this is the direction that you may want to go. Again, we're always have a caveat of, you're not hurting anybody. You're not destroying somebody's, especially at work. But I think that allowing other people to step into their authenticity and their strengths is really powerful as a leader. And having those boundaries yourself, knowing that you're not going to give somebody too much energy or take too much energy away to fulfill your wholeness, I think is a really important part of being a leader. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think that that's just powerful in general, right? Because there are sinks, there are radiators, right? But then also, I've actually had coaching relationships where I get concerned because I'm I feel like you now have plugged into me as a radiator, and that doesn't exist for you elsewhere in your experience. And that is dangerous to have that dependent on a single other person, which happens a lot in spousal relationships as well. And so being able to create that, I think this is just a really cool, my brain is going in so many, because this is a cool thing to look at, is okay, if I'm with a sink, I'm thinking about this like a basketball team, right? Like there's some sports teams who like always seem to play to the level of their opponent, right? Mm-hmm. So if they're playing a really bad team, they'll play really badly. And if they're playing a really good team, they'll play really well. But like, then what are you, right? It's like all you're doing is mirroring the environment. So are we just mirroring sinks? Are we just mirroring radiators? Because you could fill your day with radiators and then mirror radiators. But if you're just mirroring radiators, that's not coming from inside first, like an inside out radiation. So I think what we've learned here, folks, is that there's more to explore.
More conversation to be had.
Typical of the conversations that we have on this show, because these are not the type of things where we go into and be like, how do you make a Facebook ad? And we're like, here's steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that's how you make a Facebook ad. Right? Like when it comes to living life on your terms, being authentic, creating authentic connections, right? Showing up authentically in a world that maybe doesn't celebrate authenticity as much as it could. These are not things that just manifest in like 5 minutes. And it would be nice if they were, but they aren't. And so it's really important to create that expectation in us, and that when we have these conversations, it gives us room to grow. It gives us room to explore, right? It might challenge you on a level you haven't tried before. I would encourage everybody to try Cheryl's exercise. I want to try it.
Let me know how it goes.
Yeah, and share your feedback, because this is something we always, for those of you who are not new to the show, we always do a challenge on the show. And I will tell you, to date, like one person ever has come back to me to give me results of them taking the challenge. And it's not bad, right? It's just the same thing I say about conversations. If this is a conversation that's meaningful for you and it's important for you to live your life on your terms, don't just come and hang out in one conversation one time and then be like, that was fun. Like,
participate.
To people, try a thing, right? Like have a conversation, go on a journey, right? No journey is linear, so it's not going to just be like point A, point B. But there's so much good stuff that happens in the middle as well. So I just encourage you all, do the challenge, share it with us. We want to know how it's going. And lastly, Cheryl, where's the best place for people to get a hold of you if they want to connect further with you?
Yeah, that's a great question. We are on LinkedIn, or I should say I'm on LinkedIn, and that's a really great place. Dr. Cheryl A. Luther is my profile. If you type that in at the search top, it'll populate my profile. And I'm in there with like a blue shirt, I believe. So you know it's me. I've got this same crazy hair, and that's me. So that's probably the easiest way. Message me, and I'd be happy to have a chat.
Yes, awesome. And I will say from my personal experience, a chat with Cheryl is always lovely. And to make it even easier, I believe she's tagged in this post. So you can just click on her name and go right over there. Easy peasy. And look at all these other people who are in this blow up chat today. Kimberly, Andrew, Aaron, Jim, Chris. I think there were some more I'm probably missing way up there. Everybody who is here today. Well, thank you so much for all of your conversation and your contribution to the conversation. All of you are also now in the conversation about living life on your terms. So connect with each other. Yes. Have conversation, right? Continue it. New perspectives always leads to new opportunities. So with that, I'm really thirsty. I feel like I talked a lot on this one. Cheryl, thank you so much for your time today. It was lovely having you. Thank you, everyone who joined us live. Thank you for everyone who is watching on the replay. And until next time, permission to do you. Thanks, everyone.